100 million people. At least that many people will be killed in all the wars of the 20th century combined. Well, and about the same 100 million in that 20th century will die from it. Today, 11 million cigarettes are sold every minute on the planet. In total, there are already 1,300,000,000 people smoking on the planet. You can cite dozens of facts that smoking kills, but it doesn't work. And all because, for 100 years, cigarette advertising has been beautifully proving the opposite, that smoking is fashionable, stylish, and sometimes even harmless. So how do tobacco companies get mankind hooked on one of the most dangerous habits, and why is there no way it will end? It's the famous Marlboro Cowboy, or rather, actor Wayne McLaren. In '76, he will play a brutal and independent man in a cigarette commercial. And 16 years later, in '92, after having one lung removed, he will die of lung cancer. McLaren is a perfect example of what tobacco companies actually do. They come up with more and more attractive images of smokers every time, so that new inexperienced guys get hooked on tobacco nicotine and replace the cowboys of the past, who have already died from tobacco. Marlboro cigarettes are now the best-selling tobacco brand in the world. In the USA, almost half of all cigarette buyers choose it, and the brand itself is considered the most expensive among cigarette brands. But until the mid-50s, before those famous ads, no one really knows much about Marlboro. Brand sales are less than 1%, and advertising for filter cigarettes at the time was aimed mostly at women. And yes, they make the filter red so that it doesn't show lipstick marks. So why would things change? In 1950, British epidemiologist Richard Dole publicly proves that if you smoke, you are quite likely to get lung cancer or some kind of heart disease. Around the world, other scientists begin releasing their studies and calling on the government to ban or restrict cigarette sales. As you understand, this is not happening. But what do the tobacco companies do? They start actively promoting filtered cigarettes as a supposedly less harmful alternative, which of course is nonsense. But Marlboro has a problem. Remember I said they're trying to market themselves as luxury cigarettes for women. Now men aren't going to touch that kind of ladies' stuff at that time. Something has to be done, and the guys go to a famous advertiser, Leo Burnett. He suggests tobacco manufacturers not to talk about the cigarette filter device, new technologies, and other nonsense that actually proves that smoking is harmful. What for? Here are some brutal images. The sea wolf, the high-rise builder, the war correspondent, and the most ingenious is, of course, the cowboy. The main message of this ad was aimed at men. Guys, what we used to sell to women now, it's okay for you to smoke. Look at all these independent macho men who can afford filter cigarettes. And it's starting to work. And it's because the actors on the billboards are handsome men, full of charm and health. And they affect the brain more strongly than any studies about the harms of smoking and lung cancer. All these diseases are in the future. But to be an independent macho man with a cigarette in his teeth, you want to be now. And the tobacco companies will pull this trick on young, handsome men many times over. The tobacco business today brings in $912 billion a year. That's about 2 annual budgets of the biggest country in the world, Russia. And these $350 billion are the approximate figures of the world drug traffic. You will ask why I am comparing the tobacco business with drug trafficking, and even with the Russian budget. It's simple to show how much, and most importantly legally, people make money on a substance that causes addiction and kills, although it was not always so. For example, the first Russian Tsar of the Romanov dynasty, Mikhail Fedorovich, believes that tobacco is more evil than wine, and that's why everyone who smokes cut off their noses, pull out their nostrils, or simply executed. But his grandson, Peter the Great, legalizes smoking. Why? Because he smokes himself. It's much the same story with Queen Catherine de' Medici of France. She'll get hooked on tobacco too, and she'll be in favor of legalization. But still, why do very few people smoke in the past? It's simple. Then tobacco is very expensive. Mostly everyone smokes cigars and pipes. Volumes are small and everything is done by hand. But in 1881, the world changes thanks to this machine. It starts automatically rolling 200 cigarettes a minute, whereas a man could roll about 4 by hand. So in 12 hours of work, a person could theoretically roll 2,500 cigarettes, and this machine will do 144,000 in the same time. Thus, productivity is increased by almost 60 times. What's next? In 1881, the world produced about 6 billion cigarettes. 30 years later, 44 times as many, and by the middle of the 20th century, 250 times as many. That's certainly not as fast as, say, oil production is growing, but it's pretty decent. The war did a great job of spreading cigarettes. Take a look at this World War I photograph, or this one. There really are a lot of them. Tobacco companies actively exploit the soldiers' situation to get them hooked on cigarettes. They send them free cigarettes along with canned food and bread to boost their morale at the front and supposedly help them rest and relieve stress. This is what Remarque writes about it in his book On the Western Front Without Change. 10 cigars, 20 cigarettes, and 2 bars of chewing tobacco. Pretty decent. Soldiers are used in advertising because a soldier is a defender of the homeland and his image is absolutely positive. And of course, it is expected that after the war, and every war ends sometime, the soldiers will return home and will not give up their addiction. And what's more, they'll get their relatives hooked on it. And so it turned out to be. Look for yourself. At the beginning of the 20th century, only 6% of adults in the USA smoked. 60 years later, nearly half did. So why is it happening so fast? Advertising? The wildest and all kinds. Notice this poster from 28. It features the sports star of the time, New York Yankees player Tony Lazzeri. He's advertising cigarettes with a crazy slogan, "For a slender figure, reach for a lucky instead of a sweet." And at the bottom is an even more killer slogan, "No throat irritation, no coughing." But you also have to get the ladies hooked on cigarettes. And they are sold the same bullshit about the harmlessness and sometimes even the benefits of smoking. And there will be doctors who will tell you that smoking is harmless. Just think about it. 2,679 doctors said Lucky Strike is less irritating to the throat. You think that's just one brand's creativity? How's that for advertising?
More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette.
The tobacco guys don't stop at just doctors. Their advertisers quietly use children and even newborn babies. How about this slogan? "Gee, Dad, you always get the best of everything, even Marlboro." Cigarettes for all tastes are advertised by Santa Claus and even the future American president Ronald Reagan. But when every second adult in the country starts smoking, and scientists are shouting en masse about the dangers of smoking, then this shop of permissiveness must somehow be closed. First, tobacconists are forced to warn about the dangers of smoking. It is prohibited to talk about any positive effect of filters and, of course, to advertise them on radio and television. As you understand, this does not stop anyone. Huge money from sales is now beginning to be invested not in direct advertising, but in bypass, for example, in cinema. Watch this scene from Superman. And of course, cigarettes go into sports. The most striking example of the pinnacle of tobacco marketing is Michael Schumacher. Judging by these many photos, it looks like he worked for Marlboro rather than Ferrari. The tobacco brand sponsored the Formula One team for 14 years. In the fattest year, they pay the Italians $100 million, of which 20 million personally go to Schumacher's salary. The German during this time will become a 7-time world champion and actually the most famous driver in history. Sales of Marlboro cigarettes during the same time will almost double from 163 billion cigarettes a year to 301. As you can see from these cosmic sales figures, Marlboro's money for Ferrari and Schumacher is just chump change. The tobacco growers would still be selling their cigarettes and advertising them anywhere, skirting all laws if it weren't for this man, Jeffrey Wiegand. He is the man played by Russell Crowe in the movie The Insider.
You go public and 30 million people hear what you gotta say. Nothing, I mean nothing, will ever be the same again.
This fellow works for a very large tobacco company and is involved in development and research there. And in the 95th year after his dismissal, he gives a very interesting interview. He says that his former employers manipulate nicotine levels and add ammonia to cigarettes to make them more addictive. After that, people start suing tobacco companies and winning some cosmic money. For example, an American woman, Mayola Williams, sued Philip Morris for $155 million. Her lawyers proved that the company is to blame for the fact that her husband died of lung cancer, because to the end of his days he believed in the safety of smoking, which is promoted in cigarette advertising. But it's not even the amount of this lawsuit. It's the fact that the scandal on TV has caused wild outrage among ordinary people. It looks something like this. Tobacco manufacturers have been poisoning us for so many years, making billions off us and cheating us, and you, the government, do nothing and don't protect us. Then they start one hand kind of tightening the screws and the other hand charging fines to cigarette manufacturers for violations. For an example, compare what a pack of cigarettes looked like in the 90s and what it looks like now. And American Mayola Williams will not get the full $155 million. $99 million will go to the state of Oregon. It would seem that the enemy is defeated, and you will not see any more cigarette advertising, and you will not find cigarettes in the store. But let me remind you that the main goal of tobacco companies will always be the new younger generation. To replace who? The dead cowboys of the past. Which means tobacco companies have something new, trendy, and, heck again, supposedly less harmful and safer. Well, first of all, look at the numbers. Take the largest tobacco company in the world, Philip Morris. Starting in 2013, their revenues are somehow not growing and even falling, and then everything starts to go up. It is logical to think that something good happens for the company around 2017. By this time, they are massively promoting their gadgets for heating tobacco, IQOS, and naturally promote them bypassing strict advertising bans. Well, we are not selling cigarettes, but gadgets. And tobacco sticks, people buy them themselves. Just so you understand, in the 2022 annual report, these smokeless but still nicotine IQOS cigarettes account for 1/3 of Philip Morris's total revenue. And in the fourth quarter, that number is even higher at 36%. Do you know why? These cigarettes and gadgets have extremely attractive profit margins. According to some reports, you can earn 1.5 times more on one stick than on a regular cigarette. Let's remember once again the Marlboro Cowboy, or rather the actor McLaren, who died of lung cancer. After his death, his brother starred in a completely different commercial.
The tobacco industry used my brother in ads to create an image that smoking makes you independent. Don't believe it. Lying there with all those tubes in you, how independent can you really be?
Tobacco companies have been repeating the same thing to us for decades, simply changing both the characters and the scenery, and we fall for this bait every time. Please do not smoke. And in front of children too, because they look at you and repeat everything after you, as you and I repeated after the Cowboys. I hope you enjoyed the content and will continue to watch me and share links to videos.